Okay, so I think I'll go and give you guys a brief overview and welcome. So, welcome to our event. Very excited to have some great speakers here with us. So my name is Don Anrella. I'm from the USC Alumni Real Estate Network. We're a volunteer alumni organization for professionals in the real estate industry. So anything that's to do with real estate, you can join. You can kind of go to our events and join along. We plan events both in person and online. This is part of our Trojan Connect series. It's an initiative by the Alumni Association to connect Trojan professionals and kind of cater to the professional demographic. And so as a result, we thought it'd be a great event to bring in an expert in the space. So Elliot Lee, who is a founder and runs his own commercial real estate recruiting firm, as well as our wonderful moderator today, Landon Domenico, who works for Bercadia down here in Southern California. So with that, I'll hand over to Landon to get us started and take us away.
Thanks, Donald, and thank you everyone for carving out the time today to join us here. We have the pleasure of speaking with Elliot Lee here today, so we're looking forward to this discussion. So again, thank you all for taking the time, Elliot and Donald as well. So thank you all for being here. We appreciate it. Elliot, it's great to have you on board here. We appreciate you taking the time. I think, before we dive into our discussion here, I just want to let the group know here that we do have a chat service. So if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat here, and we will have a dedicated Q&A time for the last 10 or 20 minutes, and we will do our best to get to the questions. So please feel free to drop any questions you have along the way. But without further ado, Elliot, might make sense if you're able to just give us a brief overview of your career, starting from the beginning. I know I have your LinkedIn profile here. You've accomplished a lot in your early years within the commercial real estate space. So it'd be great if you could just kick it off by just sharing perhaps a little bit about your experience to where you got to today, and then we'll go ahead and dive into some of the questions that we have on our agenda.
Yeah, appreciate it, Landon, and thank you everyone for coming. It's a pleasure to speak, especially with, USC alum. Yeah, just a little bit of background about me. I graduated in 2018. I had a career in real estate that spanned across different roles and responsibilities. Started off at MetLife Investments for a couple of years doing asset management, working on a generous portfolio out of the LA office, focusing on the West, Southwest, and Hawaii region. During COVID, moved over to Brookfield for their growing industrial platform. Really got to be an early member on that side of the team, and learned a lot of activity, especially with industrial. It seemed like anything was a winner. I want to be more on the transactional side and get a different taste, and so I moved over to Eastville Secured as a senior analyst to join the bullpen, get my feet wet both on the debt and equity side in the Santa Monica headquarters, and had the pleasure of working on a ton of different deals and seeing a lot of sides of the business. More importantly, especially at this time in my business and in my career, it's I got a lot of exposure to different clients and a lot of folks in the network and in the space. I think that was extremely helpful for me, as I really was able to kind of get a better understanding of the full landscape, not just geographically, but as a nation. And so after that, I saw the market turning with the Ukraine crisis and whatnot affecting the debt markets, and went over to Balboa Retail Partners, where we focus on value-add retail. I believed in the retail thesis. My vision and idea was, hey, if I go, into this side that's been in the gutter for the last, 7-10 years, by the time I reach kind of more senior levels, there won't be as many people, well versed in the retail landscape, and so that was kind of the vision I had. Over the course of that time, I placed a lot of people at different firms, and I had a lot of joy. Something I always said when I set up my happy hours and a lot of events, and especially in LA is, and some in New York, I really like real estate, but I love people. And so in what capacity can I be more in touch? I found a little bit more about the recruiting space. I started the entity on the side to, just kind of see how it went. Ended up getting a full-time contract with Divco West, placed their associate in LA, And from there, I just realized I want to take this vision and run with it. And, I think something, a handful of you probably encountered with typical recruiters is, they're most often great people, but when it comes to truly understanding the nuances and the lengths of what we do in our jobs, especially, having been in the environment working 80 to 100 hours a week or crushing it on deals or, carrying business plans through execution, there's a level of understanding that I hope to come with in that experience and what I hope to bring in this recruiting process and service. So that's a little bit about me. Again, I hope to utilize the network that I have and the experience that I've built to really be of service to all the people, both on the candidate and the client side, to make sure that it's the right fit. For me, I don't pride myself on the number of placements. It's more so on the tenure of each placement. And so of the 10 plus people I've placed so far, over the past handful of years, all but maybe one have stayed or all but one have stayed. And the one who left was because he simply wanted to do more transactions instead of portfolio management. So, that's a little bit about me. And, I'm actively building this platform, building curriculum, and direct pipelines out of universities to start young, but also just placed the director of investments in SF and kind of am on that track. So, again, thank you everyone for coming. I really appreciate the time and the group for setting this up as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Elliot. I think, you definitely bring a really good skill set and background, into this discussion. So, having been on the principal side, having been on, some of the brokerage side, I think you carry a lot of experience into kind of crafting to where you're at today. And I think you have a good background of the industry itself. So, with that, I would love to just start diving into a little bit some of the topics that I think folks want to, really listen into today. And just starting, of course, with your expertise around your current shop right now. Just with commercial real estate, we all know that this industry is constantly evolving, and every year there seems to be a new theme. Every month there seems to be a new recurring change in the industry as well. So I think it's always important to stay on top of every new nuance and wrinkle that happens in the industry. But one question I do have for you, Elliot, off the top is just in high level, just in general, what is happening in the hiring space within commercial real estate right now? Just because we know that there's so many moving parts with the economy and the industry itself. So I'd be really curious just to hear about what you're experiencing in the field when you're looking to place people. Where are the opportunities? Where are they coming from? And just more generally speaking, what is happening in the commercial real estate industry right now?
Yeah, I think, in simple terms, it obviously isn't as great as it was in 2021 peak. But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think like with anything, there needs to be levels of correction and right sizing. And so I think that happened over the past few years, and now people have a good understanding of what their needs are, at least on, the body counts and the human side of the business. What that means is, again, that the opportunities aren't as plentiful as they were in the past, but those who are prepared, those who have the baseline fundamentals and the skills are absolutely in position to get great opportunities. As I've seen late, there have been more openings, especially at that mid-level where before it was pretty dry over the past 6 months. I talk about the senior associate, AVP up to VP levels. There's always going to be need on the junior side, right? The analysts and associates. And on the seniors, frankly, I haven't been placing, or focusing too much on any C-suite or on the MD space, but from my discussions, I have seen, a good amount of change up and kind of turnover there. I know CBR Investment Management, GIC, right? Some of these major groups have had some realignment as they, try to kind of set that new strategy forward. I'd say for the junior folks, the thing is, real estate has now become so much more of an institutionalized asset class than it was before. And I think what that translates to is the competition is just so much higher, especially at the junior level. I remember the skills that I had, especially in Excel coming out of school relative to what I'm seeing today. There is definitely a difference, at least in order to get, credible shops and opportunities. So for the junior folks, anywhere from 0 to 5 years experience, the most important thing, and, even the post MBA, you just got to be dialed in on Excel. You got to have the fundamentals. If you haven't used Argus, that's fine, but if anything, maybe take an extension course, whatever it may be, to get well equipped if you want to go more to the commercial side rather than just focusing on multi. You just have to have that more polished than you did in the past. I think at that mid-level, as things open up, the hard thing is, right, like to get to that VP director level, they look for people to bring in business and to source those opportunities. Obviously there hasn't been as much flow in the past few years for that. So, how can you make up, right, for maybe the lack of experience in leading legal through PSAs or driving a deal soup to nuts? I think in that case, what I've been trying to tell people is just be really dialed into your network. At the very least, there will be people who can train you on that last little bit of the deal, but are you at least able to kind of get your foot in the door in the right places and have the right connects and contacts? Especially if you're moving into kind of that middle market or growing firms where maybe again, it's just at the inner body count to where you're not going to have as much reach into all the geographies or regions that you guys are most interested in. I think, for the senior level, really, it's just focusing in on your execution and kind of understanding, what you've done, what you're capable of, and how you see things changing, using that experience to understand how the landscape can change or what we can learn from from the past few years of, struggle. I think, because interest rates drove so many of those deals, the problem was, especially from the capital markets and the finance heads, they were so, keen on driving returns through arbitrage on the rates rather than focusing on the operational efficiency. So how do you then notice, the gaps that were there and make up for those, right? And how do you understand why those shortcomings came and how do you, create accretive deals even through struggling times and refinance periods at higher rates? So that's at least my thoughts on, kind of where we're at in the industry today. Again, I've been telling people, look, I don't want to sound like, just a traditional broker. 26 is the year. But I do want to say this is, the past few years, there's been a lot of money raised. Maybe, fundraising periods and cycles have lagged for sure, and maybe less money has been raised. However, investment cycles are now, have already started or about to start, right? Investment period for closed-ended funds, you look at anywhere from a 3 to 5 year period. Those are starting, pressure's on, right? The gas is on. And so at some point they'll have to deploy. The money has to go to work. And so I've been seeing a lot of groups gear up and be ready. On the larger front, a lot of groups are also consolidating. You look at Harrison Street, and kind of Colliers driving Harrison Street to combine with Rockwood, TBG and Angela Gordon, right? So I think over the last couple of years, these companies have really kind of right-sized and figured the things out. And now we're at a time where, okay, it's time to execute, and we're going to need, to place certain roles for that.
No, I appreciate that. That's well said. And I think, just to echo on, something that you said, Elliot, I think the networking piece is so key in the commercial real estate space. We all know that a lot of it is sometimes who you know. Of course, what you know is an important factor as well. But I think if your ability to network, I think can ultimately be a differentiator when you're, looking to find an opportunity that best fits what you're looking for. And to kind of go on a little bit more detail on that piece, Elliot, I know you carry so much experience when you're looking to place candidates here. Now, for just the candidates that maybe don't have more of a traditional path in the real estate sector, maybe they're looking to break into the industry for the first time, and whether it be someone that's just fresh out of school or maybe someone looking for a career change in the midst of their career post grad. I'm just curious, if you don't have that traditional commercial real estate background, how are you seeing candidates really position themselves to ultimately find that job and find that opportunity that will best position themselves for the next few years down the road?
Yeah, no, great question. I think it really comes down to a couple things. One is grit, right? You just got to be willing to do anything. It's kind of like a foreign athlete coming into the NBA at 27 years old. Some of these rookies make it. How do they do that? You could say, oh, creativity or hyper. No, typically it's just grit, consistency, drive, the willingness to every day show up in ways that maybe other people become complacent, right? I spoke to a firm recently, and they're looking for to step up. And, one of the things he said was, look, regardless of what their background is, we just need someone with drive, right? We need someone who can push the ball forward, when others aren't. We need someone who can, be self-motivated and have that desire to work in this, right? Especially if you're coming at a disadvantage, in a sense of knowledge, right? How do you make up for that? It's effort. It's always effort. And so I think that's really critical. I mean, and the other thing, it's the baseline of, look, can they pick it up, right? Do they have the basics down? I was just in Denver recently. I met with, a mutual connect out. He's working at Trail Crow, following doing his MRED at SC. And great guy. Turns out he did 9 years of firefighting prior to his role. And now he's already, gotten in at a good position at, Trail Crow and, doing good work. And when we spoke, it seemed like he's been doing this work for a long time. And so I think, however quickly you can adopt, the language and the verbiage and understanding the deal cycle, it just comes down to reps, right? Just like anything in life, practice makes perfect. And so, I can tell that this guy, he only had, about 5 years now in the real estate space, including his internship. But for me, it felt like more. And, it's kind of removing that sense of doubt. People are going to have sense of doubt if, again, you come from a different background, or, it's just like, if you're playing in a league and someone started more recently, you're going to have your doubts. But once you see them actually perform when called upon and execute, that's really all that matters. And so that's where the networking piece also helps, because, if you can have someone else vouch for you, or someone say, hey, look, I know this guy, he's got a heart of gold, integrity, and at the end of the day, he or she just gets it, right? They're with it. That immediately kind of puts you there. And so I think lastly, just something to add is, have a good story, right? Look, I've worked at 4 different firms in an arguably shorter period of time than maybe some prefer, and I get the challenges with that. My last firm actually, had that question for me, and that was a big reason why they were, maybe hesitant to start. But by the end of hearing my story, they fully understood, kind of how methodical and logical every step was. And so if you can come with, a context and reasoning behind your transition and the pivot, and kind of lay it out for people and communicate clearly, I think that's always a beneficial piece too.
Yeah. No, that's great. I think, a large part of the industry too is, you have to get the reps, and oftentimes there are candidates who might not have that experience level when they're going into the job, but really the only way to get the experience is by putting yourself out there and letting folks know that you're willing to work hard, you're willing to put in the time and effort in order to gain that experience. And I think, oftentimes people might be a little bit dissuaded from applying to a position if they don't have the experience. But I think oftentimes in the commercial real estate space, just hard work, effort, and grit can ultimately be a deciding factor between someone who may have the experience but may not be willing to work as hard. So I do definitely agree with that mentality, Elliot. That's great. Great advice there. Now shifting gears a little bit into, I know we have a great audience on this call. I want to be able to cater towards all the folks that are here today. Kind of breaking it into 3 different categories, if you will, with folks who are starting off in the real estate career, or maybe they're midway through their career, perhaps 5 to 8 years into their career, or maybe they're on the more senior level and looking for other opportunities as well. And maybe if we could just kind of break out those different segments, Elliot, and just describe a little bit about each one, I think that'd be really helpful, starting with just early in your career. What skills or traits really matter the most when you're getting started in the industry? I know you touched on hard work and effort and grit, and I think those are all great, but any additional insights you have just when you're getting your feet wet, starting post grad, you're not exactly sure maybe what part of the industry you want to be in, but we all know that getting the experience, getting the reps is ultimately the most important thing. So if you could just touch on early in your career, what ultimately matters most there.
Yeah, I think early in my career, I mean, especially now looking at the placement of junior candidates, I think, again, first and foremost, you got to have the fundamentals. You got to have the basics. You got to be able to, and that's why I actually case all young folks, up to, up to kind of that senior associate level is because, hey, can you underwrite a cash flow from scratch? Can you do the waterfall? How do you present it? I think a lot is undervalued in the presentation piece as well. That's something that I remember when I was at Eastville, one of the guys he's continued to have a successful career out in New York, but he was saying that when he looks at case studies, and I don't think this is for everyone, but presentation arguably matters as much, sometimes more than necessarily the exact numbers, because look, maybe they got the formula wrong on one piece or it drove, a chain reaction, but understanding the presentation and getting it, right? Getting the idea that, look, it's not just about getting to this answer just like a test. It's instead understanding the holistic approach where, eventually these numbers go to IC. These numbers go past, right? This is valuable, and how you do one thing is how you do everything, right? And so having that attention to detail all around, that's going to get you far. So I think, yeah, attention to detail is a critical piece that a lot of junior folks, including myself, have missed when coming out. I think, I remember saying I had, maybe it was ego or whatever was driving it was, I'll get the right number. Like that's all that matters now. And then kind of realizing, no, there's more to it than that.
Yeah.
Having that attention to detail builds trust. It builds, confidence in the fact that, okay, this person cares. It's not just about getting this one number, it's about the whole aspect of. And so, yeah, for junior folks, I preach this all the time to the students I teach is, you've got to have that level of urgency and attention to detail, because if you do, you will then get trusted by the senior folks or your manager, and knowing that, okay, if I give this assignment, to Landon, if I give it to Elliot or Sarah, whoever, right, they're gonna treat it as if it's their baby, and that it matters more than what the average person thinks. So, yeah, that's my biggest advice to young people: attention to detail, urgency.
That's great. And if I could add one piece as well, Elliot, I'd also add, we're all human here too. So I think sometimes mistakes are inevitable. No one's perfect. And I think for the younger folks who are, getting into the industry, I think mistakes, will happen, but I think it's ultimately how you respond to those mistakes and what you learn from those mistakes in order to do your best to hopefully not make it again. And I think that oftentimes can be a really big piece for younger people in the industry, as well as just learning from past missteps and getting better from it as well. I think that's also a key piece, just to add on to what you said. I think it makes a lot of sense there, Elliot. And now, of course, shifting towards perhaps maybe midway through your career, let's just assume you have a couple of years of really good experience. You've gotten the reps. You're starting to be an experienced person in the industry. I would love for you to touch on just certain pieces that, maybe could help you elevate your career. Maybe you're at a senior analyst position, or maybe you're an associate level looking to take that next step into perhaps being a little bit more senior or having some more decision-making authority. I would just be really curious to hear what you see from the candidates that really separate themselves to continue to grow within the industry and progress up the ladder as best you can. So it'd be great to have you touch on that as well.
Yeah, I think the most important piece is at that level, right? Assuming you got the fundamentals down, you got the basics, you've gotten your reps, you have a better idea of what you like, what you don't like. It's kind of willingness to carry that extra responsibility. That extra responsibility can include, taking the initiative on certain deals, managing whoever is right under you, right? It's showing this level of attention and care that, hey, it is no longer, oh, I am being fed. It's, I'm being fed still, but how do I feed others as well? And how do I carry more of my weight in this team, right? I think a good example is, like, let's say, whether there are lease expirations coming up or things that maybe the manager, hey, they're focusing on these 3 key items, but there's another list of 7 additional items. How do you, utilize your skills and what you've learned to kind of alleviate those pressures? Maybe you can't help on the first, priority 3, but then how do you take remaining things off their plate? Because by then you should have a better understanding of how it works, the systems, your manager. And so, again, yeah, kind of filling in more responsibility on your plate, and taking those extra steps to show, that aspiration for growth and aspiration to be a bigger part of the team. I think for me at that kind of, as you get a little bit more experience, those are the pieces that, because then the partners or whoever above, they're going to be like, okay, clearly
Yeah.
they care, right?
Yeah.
Clearly this is something they're focused on and that they have their attention towards. And these are the spots that, again, like, I don't want to do this right now, or I can't, I don't have the capacity. The fact that they alleviated some of that pressure, that's huge.
No, that's great. And I think, to summarize, I would even put it into two different words, being proactive versus being reactive. I think, once you have the
Mm-hmm.
fundamentals and you have the experience, I think you could be able to foresee some additional challenges or additional tasks that you could perhaps take on without having to wait and get that task assigned to you. I think that can ultimately be a separator for folks to continue to grow in the industry as well. So I think very well said there, Elliot. And of course, I want to touch on the senior level folks as well. I think with so many senior leaders hitting that peak at 65, I would be curious from your perspective, what's ultimately driving succession decisions and determining some of these hires at the executive levels.
Yeah, again, I have more limited exposure on this side. However, from the ones that I do know and I'm close to and I see, there's a level of drive. And I mentioned it earlier, but drive is really the big thing. I think especially at that level, look, a lot of times at the senior level, right, you've kind of lived a longer life. You've had more, maybe your kids are in college or whatever it may be. So I think the danger may be how comfortable is this person, right? But the ones that I've seen continue to ride success and to continue, accomplishing, their goals are the ones that they just never stop, right? And not necessarily to an unhealthy degree, but they never stop as in they're just always thinking. I look at my dad, for example, and he always told me, when I was younger, he's like, yeah, never retire. Not because, I necessarily can't or this or that, but no, I just love what I do and I'm constantly curious and I want to keep driving forward. And I think that's something I've seen in a lot of more, successful senior folks. And also the stories I hear of them getting laid off is oftentimes, like they're just, it wasn't a fit and, we weren't really sure. Whereas the ones who continue to have the position they're always thinking, strategizing, finding problem solving, finding ways to make things work and make things better. They just have that hunger, and especially if, you don't have direct, equity in the company or necessarily an early member, or you've been there for super long. I think it's more imperative that you come in with that hunger and that drive. Because again, the fear is, okay, if we hire you at this point, like, what is the true value add? You're very expensive, and we would expect growth and, whatever it may be, analytics to support this decision, right? And so, if you're continuously driving that network and that growth, both in yourself and for the company, that's kind of the key piece that from what I've seen in the stories I've heard.
You used the word, Elliot, curious. I think that word can be applied to the early, mid, or senior level stages of your career. I think, having a curious mind will always facilitate additional learning. I saw a question come in. I just want to touch on it, but a plug for a book that I found useful was called A Curious Mind by Brian Grazer. He was an individual who is now a very successful movie producer, but he started from the ground up and was just very curious about learning in the industry, and he just consistently wants to be more knowledgeable about the industry, and that ultimately helped him get to where he is today. So I think I just wanted to add that piece as well. I think the curiosity is a big component to the industry. So thanks, Elliot. Appreciate that, and want to jump to
One other thing too.
yeah.
Oh, really quick. One other thing too, and this is something I had to learn myself, and I'm always working on this. And this applies to all levels. Is I think absence of ego to a degree. I think whether you went to great school or you went, I know obviously all of us went to USC in some capacity, or if you had a great background or you had great success during this period of time. whatever it may be, the people that I've found to continue finding success, they never settle, and they just, they're able to strip that ego off and really just gone for it. And like you said, stay curious. And again, it's something I've battled with and I continue to battle with. If, oh, I was able to do this, oh, great, then, maybe I can take a shortcut here. But in reality, it's, how do you continue showing up regardless of what your past is? A fun quote that I remember a mentor of mine telling me is, you're only as good as your last deal, right? And so, you never look at kind of the history aggregation of what you've done. Instead, you just look at, what the next one is. And so, I think that's a big thing. I've seen a lot of people, lose out on some opportunities just because, they've had the idea that, oh, I'm better than this, or, I should be here. And to a degree that can be fair, but ultimately it's those who just keep after it and don't worry about, areas of credibility or validation to kind of boost them up. Those are the ones that I've found to continue finding, good opportunities.
Totally, man. I agree 100% there. And I think you can even, become a really good mentor that way too, is if you just kind of set aside the ego and, really kind of position yourself to want to continue to help folks that are, learning and growing. And I think just that of course is a huge component to staying humble as well. So definitely agree with that mindset there, Elliot. Wanted to shift towards another section I wanted to cover with the call as well is we've categorized it as making the right next move. So let's just paint a picture here. Maybe we're in a company where we've been working several years, and maybe for lack of better words, there might not be an opportunity to continue to move up the chain, and maybe you're looking for to pivot. So I'm curious, how should professionals really think about timing if they're looking to make a move?
That's a good question. There's no real one set answer here, but a few factors to consider. Again, things I thought about in my past. Ultimately, is the role you're in, synced up with your natural abilities, or getting you to accomplish flow state. I think flow state, and for those who are not familiar with that verbiage, flow state is, you don't necessarily have to be the most passionate about the topic of what you're doing, but in the execution of any task, right? Is that allowing your brain to operate on a level where you often don't get with other things, right? And so, I always think about what is it that I can do and continue to do without stimulants or like caffeine or coffee that just gets me going and wired, and I can do it, and lose track of time. I don't know if some of you can tell, and those, who know me on this call, I do have the gift of gab. I am able to talk a lot. That's kind of when my brain starts really running and operating, and I'm feeling all the lubrications in the engine going. And so because of that, I knew, to stay in a more analytical role was just not my future, to be chained to a desk, right? Or to, be more on the asset management side. For me, I found to be more of a struggle in kind of finding that daily fulfillment. So yeah, I think first and foremost, identify what accomplishes your flow state. If you're more of a structured person, and you're maybe a little bit more in the asset management or operational space, great. If you're kind of more in the transactional space and on a whim, week by week, whether you're on the, brokerage team or investments team, having to work late nights randomly for deals, and that's not your type of lifestyle that you ideally create, then, right, find that alignment. So yeah, that's the first thing, is identify, what gets you there.
Yeah.
For me, right, hearing my MD say, hey, we just got a deal in and we got to sprint, we got to run. For me, that got me going. Whereas, hey, we have quarterly reporting in a couple of weeks. We got to take care of this. We have a 2-month lead time. For me, I needed more of that sense of urgency. And so that felt more of a weight on my shoulders. Whereas, being called to pull an all-nighter was actually much more invigorating. So yeah, that's one thing. I think the second is, look, I try to emphasize, it's best to stay places at least, I know it used to be longer, but 1 to 2 years, it should, otherwise there definitely is a red flag on the resume. Again, me having personally dealt with it myself. I think if there's a reasoning, look, if the head leadership left, or similar to, right, college football, right? Like if your head coach leaves, you kind of understand the transfer, but, if all things are the same, what is your reasoning for this move? Unless it's rare that it's an extremely toxic, terrible environment, but there's just got to be a logical thought process behind every decision. I think the most important thing is really intentionality and patience. Um, how intentional and thoughtful can you be in this process? And if you were to lay this out to a person or even flip the script where you heard this story from someone else, does it make sense? Right. I think otherwise, it may kind of put a damper on your chances just because, again, that it wasn't perfect per their standard, but maybe they're only 5 years in their career or less. How do they really know what's
Yeah.
perfect or what's better? And so, yeah, ultimately, A, synchronize with, what kind of role allows you to reach flow state, and B, have intention and reasoning behind everything you do, understanding that, there are certain like benchmarks that you should ideally hit unless there are bigger
Yeah.
reasonings or factors as to why you're leaving.
Yeah, and I think the commercial real estate space, there's endless opportunities. We can be on the principal side, it could be on the lending side, it could be on the brokerage side, or asset management, or property management. There's so many different components to the industry, which is what makes it so great. And to kind of use this for a next question, Elliot. I mean, just as far as if you're maybe, you're just been in one side of the business for, a couple of years and you might want to explore some other sides of the business. Are there some questions that you think you might want to ask yourself before you're looking to make that pivot? Because I know you touched on, you want to find what really drives you and you want to find what really captures the most interest. But what if you only have that just, that one layer of experience? If it's, let's just say, assuming you've been on the brokerage side for 5 years, what really drives those questions when you're looking to potentially find a new role in the commercial real estate side?
Yeah, I think, and one thing I should add to the last point, and it kind of flows into this, is if you were to move, right, you have to really ask yourself, did I learn as much as I can as reasonably possible, in this space? So for example, going to Eastville, right? They're a brokerage house and, investment bank, or whatever you want to call it, but a lot of times, right, it's a high turnover shop. People do 2 to 3 years and bounce out at the junior level. Even though people know, hey, I want to do buy side or go, more on the PE side eventually. I talk to a lot of them, and even though they know that, they still say, I'm going to stay another year or two because I still have more to learn. And I think that for me is a very positive thing, because then you can sincerely tell, yourself and your future, employer, yeah, I squeezed all the juice out of that fruit that I can for me. Ultimately the next step is sourcing, or, more of the wine and dine or whatever it may be, or OMs and whatnot. And, for me, I now want to build this skill of the actual investment side or the asset management and the operation side. So, really being able to confidently say, hey, I learned everything I wanted to out of that place. And I stay grounded to make sure that those were dialed in so I can bring it to this next place. That was great. I think so much of real estate is intertwined and is useful. For example, early on in my career, I was often told, by MDs and other professionals of either my asset management, not me, but them, they're like, my asset management experience is what made me a great investor. Or, they would say, yeah, AM is one of the biggest keys to being successful in investments because you can see the loopholes, you can see, kind of the blind spots that other people don't, not having worked in the operational space. And I agree wholeheartedly with that. If you have debt experience and you're going to equity, to understand, how to avoid, whether it be co-tenancy trips or, all these loan covenants and aspects within that realm, how do you, kind of understand it and bring that to the next place that you go to. So, I think, and I'm sorry if I'm a little off on your question, but more or less,
Great.
because real estate is so tied in all different ways, there's so much synergy between each group, debt, equity, sponsor, LP, operator, all these things. So where as long as you can, that you learn as much as you can on that side of the business and then bring it in and apply it into the next role, I think that's super critical.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I got one more question on my list here, Elliot, and then I will open it to the Q&A floor that we have in the chat here. So folks, if you guys want to feel free to put other questions in the chat here, but I'll add my last question for you, Elliot, is just if we could put a bow on it as far as just advice that you could get, one single piece of advice that you would give to someone looking to position themselves for long-term success in the commercial real estate industry. I'd love to hear what that would be from your perspective.
I think the simple answer for that is finding joy in what you do. Look, we're not saving lives here. We're not, necessarily, fostering, kids or puppies or whatever, but finding joy in what we do, right? And understanding that, sure, we don't have maybe a straight up, beautiful kind of day-to-day value add that we're bringing, but knowing that, hey, what I'm doing coming in every day with a smile on my face because, I get to solve problems, work with great people, surround myself with good, network and attend fun events and whatever it may be and enjoy my job and the culture I'm in. I think joy is one of the biggest things that, we need to make sure we have in our lives, because that's what drives, us forward. I think, it's sometimes easy to get lost in the stressors. It's easy to kind of get lost in, whatever it may be, whether the properties in our portfolio are underperforming or, maybe our relationship isn't as great with our manager or the people under, or who we're working with. But, how can you align, your workplace and what you do every day to find that joy, whether it's, to add more gratitude in your life or, to find creative ways to be more plugged in with the people around you. I think community is a huge driver of joy. And so, how do we mix that in? And I say this because, again, I think in a time of heavy social media, of radical politics, of just constant, noise everywhere, sometimes we ignore a bit more of the micro approach. And, as I've spent time to reflect a lot on that, I found so much, just happiness in my day to day, even, starting out this business, right? And taking the risk. It's hard not to do with a smile on my face because, again, that's been kind of the main focus that I've had. And even when I was in a workplace, even in times where I was, working all-nighters or spending a ton of hours on things that, ultimately, either died or whatever it may be, I knew that I trust the people around me. I knew that I had a good environment that I set up for myself and, put a lot of those layers in place. And so I treat my career as a game rather than my identity. And I think that's something that, I really try to preach to young folks as well. At the end of the day, look, macro environment's going to do what's going to do. There's so many things out of our control. And so as much as I just can, I try to just put my head down and try to be the best, person for whatever role I'm in every day. If it goes well, great. If it doesn't, it sounds like I got more work to do. And then kind of go from there. So I treat it as a game. And because of that, I find a lot of joy in the game, just as I do in any game I play. And that'd be my kind of word of advice for that side.
That's great. That's great. Well, we have 15 minutes remaining. So Elliot, we have some questions that have come in through the chat. So I'm going to get to as many as I can with the amount of time that we have remaining here. One question came up that I think I'd love for you to chime in, just so you could perhaps give us a little bit more insight on Wildwood, your company, of course. What differentiates Wildwood to be unique from the other recruiting shops? We'd love to hear the pitch on the group, and anything that you want to add about your group here would be great.
Yeah, I'd say first and foremost, just the years of experience in the field, the depth of network that I've built through that time, having worked at 4 different shops in different, kind of strategies and, what a life co, investment manager in Brookfield, investment bank brokerage in Eastdale, and a private equity fund, from Balboa. I've worked at headquarters, small offices, satellite offices, and for me, again, just the love and understanding of people, the science behind it, that for me is science and art behind it is, what stands out. But again, to mix that with the technical ability, the technical understanding of, what the actual day-to-day looks like versus other recruiters, that's a big pitch that I have. Right now, I'm actually self-building a curriculum to provide. So I do university tours throughout both semesters. So far, I've spoken to the clubs, real estate clubs at USC, UCLA, Claremont McKenna, NYU, Cornell, Wisconsin. I have NYU Shanghai coming up, in addition to Indiana, working with Notre Dame, Northwestern, Washington, and I have a few others kind of in the pipeline to execute on starting next next school year. And so, really being able to grow people and understand, what it is that employers want and are looking for and are not getting, to be able to be extremely transparent. Again, having been there, having failed at times myself, having succeeded at other times, right? To blend that all into, an opportunity to give that transparent information. Look, I sat in the bullpen of some of these companies to where, I know what people murmur or are thinking that they're not going to relay because of, whatever it may be, right? It's safer in this time and age to say nothing than to say something. But for me, I want to be as transparent as possible because again, it's usually not personal. It's just kind of how people are wired to think, especially in this industry. It's a cutthroat, type A environment. And so how do you get people, built up on the etiquette and the basics early on? So it's not about, oh, no one ever taught me this. It said, oh yeah, I was given that information and therefore I executed on it, right? If I give people information and they end up not taking it, at least I know, hey, I did my best. I put in the effort to make sure that they had it available. And at the end of the day, they just didn't get it. It is what it is. But more often than not, people are really receptive to this feedback. People are really receptive to getting better and understanding that, yeah, that so what, maybe some people just think like this. That's okay. Let me align to it, so that, it doesn't cause friction early on. Because it's just simple communication. But again, I think, nowadays we kind of resort to, oh, they'll figure it out. Screw that, right? Like, let me help them figure it out.
Yep.
And then they'll take it from there.
Well said. Well said. And we have a question that came in from Leslie Adams here, regarding what resources, whether it be books, websites, networking organizations. I've threw in a book that I thought was interesting, but of course, we'd love to hear your side of things as well. That what sort of resources would you recommend individuals, taking advantage of for exposure or learning, or just to be better equipped in the industry altogether?
Tough question. I'm not currently actively reading any real estate related books. For me, I'll poke around at CoStar headlines and, oftentimes have people in my network that can elaborate further on certain things. Wall Street Journal has a real estate section that I used to read pretty frequently. For those who are at companies right now, Real Estate Alert, or, that usually has some pretty high level content. And really, again, just kind of tapping in the network. This last week, I've had a handful of buddies from the real estate space, all VPs, directors at their respective firms. And, they called me and they're just to catch up because, again, it's more than anything, it's just making friends. Kind of what I was saying about joy and all this is I create a lot of friendships in the industry, not because there was any transaction we made, just because, hey, finding like-minded individuals who, enjoy talking to each other, getting, hanging out or whatever it may be, sometimes even ski trips. And so, that has been a big source of a lot of the real estate knowledge that I get as well. But yeah, just kind of tapping into all different avenues as much as you can. But again, sometimes it's, just because a headline on a deal isn't really going to push the ball further. But, having people in your network you can talk about these things with and brainstorm so that in an interview process, you can actually kind of critically think and show that side of you, and some, discussions you've had, that I think makes a bigger difference.
Got it. And shout out to Mike A. He goes in here. He mentioned the Tripwire podcast, the Walker and Dunlop podcast, just to kind of stay in the loop with the commercial real estate side of things. I think those are great ideas just to kind of stay in the know with what's happening in the industry. I think I've had just a small piece. I mean, my perspective is you never know what's going to happen years down the road. It's always good to just maintain good, strong relationships with people that you get along with, and you never know what could happen down the road. So I think that's just to add my just 2 cents there. But another question that came in, we have a couple more minutes here. Elliot, we had a question in are there any differences in placing candidates at bigger name institutional firms or your smaller, more boutique entrepreneurial type groups? Do you see any major differences when you're looking to place candidates in those two buckets?
I guess the question is from the client perspective or the candidate perspective?
Let's go from your perspective. Yeah.
Okay. So I guess the big names versus small. I mean, I think more. I think it's the bigger question is more from the candidate side because from the client side, it's look, they just want to take whoever can show up, do the job well, and go from there. If anything, maybe some of the small shops, it's just they're so varied, right? Some are operating at high octane, former Blackstone principals running the shop versus other smaller shops maybe are more family office oriented, wealth preservation mindset. So it's a bit hard. So from the candidate perspective, I think, for the bigger name shops, look, it'll be a little bit more like a well-oiled machine where they're going to be, or at least, I guess, okay. So from the big groups, they're going to be, approach it more like a well-oiled machine. They're going to be a little bit more particular on, certain things, whether, and from what I've seen, at times maybe pedigree or experience or, kind of a traditional story, just because, hey, we're a big name. We know we can get the top talent, right? The people who, were more or less groomed from a certain point into this role. Whereas smaller companies, they understand that there is a little bit more upsell to that versus a big company. Recently, I placed a candidate as an analyst with this retail operator down in SoCal, and they have some pretty strong institutional partnerships, but it's not a household name. Whereas he had an offer from a mega fund out in New York, paying probably 60% more. He ended up taking the operator out of SoCal, and so his mindset was, so from the client, right, the operator, they were like, hey, you know what, we love that this person is hungry and capable, but from a candidate perspective, it was really, hey, I want to be at a place where I have more long-term vision, long-term growth. The culture is more geared towards what I'm looking for and what I want. And I feel because also they are more, niche, I will be able to really become an expert in said field. And so, I mean, look, there are benefits to both, right? With big names, from what I've seen in my recruiting history, I've always gotten my foot in the door easier just because, they see the big institutional names like, oh, great. It's kind of like going to USC versus, maybe a more local school where it's like, oh, okay, we kind of immediately have recognition of, what guardrails are there and, what you had to get filtered through in order to make it. And so whereas a smaller shop, you might actually learn more and get more, kind of day-to-day responsibility and opportunity. But there are also less guardrails in that case where it's like less training or, regimented structures to kind of help you early on. So, it's all kind of different. There's a lot more layers to that question, but that's just kind of high level.
I appreciate that. And, we have 5 minutes here. So I think we'll probably be able to tend to one additional question. And I want to frame it so that, we're, of course, a real estate related Zoom call here. Real estate loves to have sayings in the industry. In 2024, it was survive till 25, of course. 2025 ended up being 2025 ended up being, a better year overall, but I'd still say there's definitely some fundamental challenges that we're still experiencing in the industry itself. So I'll put you on the spot, Elliot, if you have any, forecasted themes for 2026. Love to just kind of wrap it up with your thoughts on the rest of the year here.
Oh man, this is one of the few times where I'd actually want to employ the help of ChatGPT. I mean, we got heaven in 27. I don't know. I think right now, again, it's, for me, it's just kind of like a New Year's resolution where it's kind of pointless to set a time and date to start, right? Best day to start is yesterday. Next best is today. So, instead of worrying about the next year, this, that, just, hey, where can I start today to get that ball rolling? Again, we're in an employer's market right now. It's definitely not the easiest times, but the horizon is looking better, and I can actually say that wholeheartedly, having talked to a handful of folks that are actively, right now recruiting for, placements. And I am excited to see how it grows and what comes of it. I'm excited for a lot more deal flow and opportunities created. And yeah, especially for the USC network, I'm really excited to see more, opportunities come out and people
Yeah.
filling them. I think, we have a great advantage in our network and location. But one thing, I just always want to emphasize is at the end of the day, it comes down to execution. It comes down to the want, right? And so
Yeah.
we need to kind of hold each other accountable to be hungrier than the next. Having been again across the states, both ways over the last 6 months, and all these different schools and places and people, sometimes, Californians, we do get a little bit comfortable. We do get a little bit, complacent, whatever it may be. So, to kind of invigorate ourselves to be the best, I think that should be the number one mission, regardless of 26, 27, 28, whatever it may be. That's how we should do it. And again, this is a projection of my own goals, right? It's holding myself accountable too.
Yeah.
Because I'm far from, the version I want to be. And so, yeah. And with that, just kind of spreading joy across,
Yeah.
in everything we do.
Well said, Elliot. Well, I apologize, was not able to get to all the questions. Just want to be respectful of everyone's time here to be within our 1 hour time limit. But Elliot, thank you so much for taking the time. You said some really great things, and I learned a lot myself. So I really appreciate you taking the time to educate and share with your thoughts on the real estate industry itself. And my last comment for the group here is, if you could all please just navigate through to Donald's chat in our chat box here. We have some social media pages that would be great for all of you to continue to follow along for events like this. And as we discussed up front, we also have in-person events as well, where we're doing property tours and some social get-togethers. So by any means, please navigate to that LinkedIn page. We also have an Instagram page as well. So just want to let everyone know that, so you're in the loop with what's happening next. But appreciate everyone's time here. Elliot, thanks again. And Donald and Simone, appreciate everyone's time here.